Hello, my name is Linda Hoskins, and I've spent 15 years in the cockpit, flying everything from short domestic hops to transcontinental night runs that seem to stretch across eternity. I've seen auroras paint the sky green, thunderstorms crack open clouds like glass, and satellites drift across the black silence of the upper atmosphere. But nothing, and I mean nothing, has ever unsettled me the way that one flight did, the flight to Helsinki. It was a late winter night, the kind pilots secretly love, the kind where the world below disappears under a blanket of snow and darkness, and you feel like you're suspended between stars and ice. I was the co-pilot on Flight 428, a long-haul route from Vancouver to Helsinki, a polar crossing that slices across the Arctic Circle. Our captain, John Madsen, was one of the calmest, most collected men I'd ever flown with. He didn't believe in ghosts, UFOs, or any kind of nonsense. His world ran on logic, math, and weather reports. That's why, when things started to go strange, his silence scared me more than anything else. The first hours were smooth. The engines purred, the passengers were asleep, and the cabin lights were dimmed to a soft amber glow. Outside, the temperature hovered around -60 degrees, and the air was thinner than thought. We were cruising at 37,000 feet, heading northeast over the frozen wilderness. The sky was unusually clear for a polar route, no cloud cover, no solar activity warnings, nothing but endless night. I remember glancing at the instrument panel when I first saw it. A faint shimmer caught my eye through the right window, just a small bluish glow at first, like a reflection from an instrument light. I leaned closer. It wasn't a reflection. It was outside, hanging in the air just beyond the wingtip. At that altitude, anything visible usually means another aircraft, a contrail, or some natural light phenomenon. But this wasn't moving away. It was holding steady. "John, do you see that?" I asked, pointing toward the right side of the windshield. He leaned forward, squinting through the darkness. "Yeah, what is that? A star?" "Too low for a star," I said quietly. "It's at our altitude." He reached for the anti-glare switch, thinking it might be a lens reflection. But even after the cockpit dimmed, the glow stayed exactly where it was, a soft sphere of light, bluish-white, pulsing faintly. It wasn't flickering like an aircraft beacon. It was smooth, steady, almost deliberate. The longer we looked, the clearer it became. It was following us. John adjusted our heading slightly to the left, just a small correction. The sphere mirrored the move instantly. It didn't lag behind. It turned in sync, keeping the same distance, the same height, the same impossible calm. "Could be another aircraft," he said, but even he didn't sound convinced. "Maybe a reflection from a satellite, or—" "Satellites don't match our course," I said, my voice quieter than I wanted it to be, "and they don't hover." The light stayed with us for 10 minutes, then 15. It didn't close in or drift away, it just accompanied us. I tried to rationalize it, to think of any explanation. Street? Elmo's fire, maybe. That sometimes happens around the nose or windshield during high static conditions. But Street Elmo's fire moves, dances, flickers. This didn't. It was too solid, too fixed, like a presence. When the glow brightened slightly, I felt a chill crawl up my arms. It wasn't fear, not exactly. It was something else, a sensation that the air inside the cockpit had shifted, as if the space around us was being watched or measured. John said nothing, just stared straight ahead, hands gripping the yoke tighter than before. At 2:47 UTC, he finally spoke. "Let's get confirmation. Call Murmansk Control." I nodded, switching frequencies. "Murmansk Control, this is Polar Air, 428, requesting confirmation of possible traffic at our 12 o'clock position, maintaining flight level 370. Do you have anything on radar?" There was a pause, the kind that stretches seconds into minutes. Then the voice came through, slightly distorted by the polar static. "Polar 428, negative. No traffic reported at your altitude or heading. Could you repeat description?" "Visual contact with a light sphere," I said carefully. "Appears to be matching our altitude and movement. Position off our starboard side. Estimated distance, 1 nautical mile. Another pause. Then, negative radar return. Suggest verify no internal reflection. I glanced at John. He shook his head slightly. It's not a reflection, he muttered. You're seeing it too. We watched it in silence. The instruments were steady, the weather clear. The light didn't interfere with any system readings or navigation. It just existed, calmly, deliberately, moving with us through the Arctic night. Below us, the world was black ice and frozen silence. Above us, the stars burned cold. And somewhere between, this thing kept pace with a precision no natural object could maintain. At one point, I thought I saw it pulse, a slow, almost breathing rhythm of light. It didn't look mechanical. It looked alive. When I looked down at my wristwatch, 40 minutes had passed since I first noticed it. I hadn't even realized how long we'd been staring. Time seemed stretched thin, like those moments before turbulence when your body braces instinctively for impact. Except nothing happened. No motion, no communication, no sound. Then, as abruptly as it had appeared, the sphere started to drift upward, slowly at first, then faster. It rose past our altitude, gaining height with a smooth, deliberate motion until it vanished into the upper darkness. The radar remained blank. The radio silent. John exhaled for the first time in what felt like an hour. "Well," he said finally, "that's going in the report." We didn't talk much after that. We finished our shift in silence, the hum of the engines filling the air like white noise. But I couldn't stop thinking about the way the light had matched us, our speed, our turns, our altitude, as if it had been curious. Watching, learning. When we finally landed in Helsinki, the passengers filed out unaware that anything strange had happened. John and I walked together through the frosty dawn, the sky above us pale and empty. I remember glancing up, half expecting to see it again. There was nothing. That was just the beginning of what came next. The radar confusion, the footage, the quiet questions from officials who never looked surprised. But in that moment, standing on the tarmac with my breath fogging the air, I realized something simple and deeply unsettling. We spend our lives believing we control the skies. That night, for 40 minutes, I wasn't so sure anymore. The next night was one of those quiet stretches in aviation where the world feels suspended. The passengers were asleep, the sky outside pitch black, and the glow of the instrument panel cast a soft green light over the cockpit. I was still trying to make sense of what I'd seen the night before when it happened again. This time, there was no mistake. No chance of a reflection, no weather anomaly, no illusion. The sphere was back. It appeared suddenly, out of nowhere, off the starboard side again, bright, steady, and so perfectly spherical, it looked almost artificial, not like a burst of plasma or some wandering light. It had form, depth, purpose. The blue-white hue pulsed softly, as if the thing had a heartbeat, and once again, it matched our altitude exactly. I leaned forward and pressed my hand to the window, trying to judge the distance. It wasn't far, maybe a mile, maybe less. Even at that range, I could tell it wasn't flickering or distorted by turbulence. It was holding steady, riding the same invisible currents as our Boeing 787. Captain Madsen turned off the cockpit lights again, muttering under his breath. "That's not an optical reflection," he said, more to himself than to me. "We're at 37,000 feet, no cloud layer, no city lights for 1,000 miles. There's nothing out here to reflect." I nodded, my eyes locked on the glow. "Then what's it following us for?" He didn't answer. To test it, he gently adjusted the heading. Not a dramatic turn, just a minor correction, enough to see how the sphere would react. And react it did. The moment we banked left, the sphere curved left with us, keeping perfect formation. Every turn, every altitude shift, it moved like a shadow tethered to our aircraft. I watched in silence, my pulse picking up. The rational part of my mind tried to list explanations. A drone, though none could reach this altitude. Another aircraft, though transponder silence made that impossible. some strange reflection of light from ice crystals. But no, we were too high for that, and the air too dry. "This is impossible," I whispered. Madsen didn't reply. His eyes were still locked on the orb. Then, almost like it heard me, the light began to move. It drifted slightly closer, not enough to trigger alarm systems, but enough that I could feel the nearness of it, the way it seemed to hum against the air itself. It wasn't emitting sound, but the silence around it felt charged, like the pause before lightning strikes. Madsen's voice came low and deliberate. "Linda, switch to night vision mode. Let's see if the cameras can catch anything." I flipped the infrared feed onto one of the auxiliary screens. The light sharpened instantly on the display, clean, bright, perfectly round. It didn't flare or distort like natural light. It looked solid. "Jesus," Madsen murmured. "It's the same one. The same one." That phrasing struck me. He hadn't said a light, he'd said the light, as if we both knew instinctively this wasn't random. Whatever this thing was, it wasn't an isolated occurrence. Then came the strangest part. The light moved slightly ahead of us, keeping pace, then began to oscillate, up, down, side to side, almost playfully, as if testing us. I remember gripping the armrest, torn between awe and dread. It wasn't aggressive, but it wasn't passive either. It was aware of us, watching, matching, reacting. For a moment, the sphere flared brighter, bathing the cockpit in a dim glow that filtered through the glass. My heartbeat echoed in my ears. Then, as if satisfied, it dimmed again, returning to its steady rhythm. "Murmansk Control, this is Polar 428, Madsen said, steady but firm. "We're still visual with unidentified aerial light, maintaining formation. Any updates from radar?" The radio crackled. "Polar 428, negative contact. Radar remains clear. Recommend visual confirmation procedures only." Visual confirmation procedures, meaning keep your eyes on it, but don't expect help. The light continued to follow us for nearly 20 minutes. It moved with uncanny precision, perfectly stable, almost intelligent. At times, it would drift slightly behind, then sweep forward again to align with our nose. The motion was smooth and deliberate, too precise for wind or air currents to explain. At one point, the sphere suddenly shot upward, rising several hundred feet before slowing again to match our altitude. I watched, stunned. Nothing I knew could maneuver like that without a visible propulsion source. No vapor trail, no heat signature, just motion. Then came the strangest moment of all. The light began to pulse faster, almost like Morse code. A repeating pattern. 2 slow flashes, 1 quick, over and over. I stared at it, unable to look away. It wasn't random. It looked like communication. "John," I said softly, "it's signaling." He didn't answer right away. When he finally did, his voice was quiet. "If it's trying to say something, I'm not sure we want to know what." And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the sphere began to drift backward, slowly at first, then with increasing speed, until it was just a faint glimmer in the darkness. A few seconds later, it was gone. We sat there in silence. The hum of the engines filled the cockpit again, grounding us back in reality. But I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever that thing was, it hadn't just vanished. It had left, intentionally. That night changed something in me. I'd flown thousands of hours, trusted instruments, procedures, physics, but after that encounter, logic felt small. In the Arctic sky, far above the world, we had seen something that didn't belong, something that moved like it knew us, mirrored us, and maybe, just maybe, was studying us. I looked at Madsen. His jaw was tight, his eyes fixed straight ahead. He didn't say another word for the rest of the flight. Neither did I. But deep down, I knew it wasn't over. Whatever that sphere was, it would be back. When the light first appeared, disbelief was easy. Pilots are trained to trust instruments over instinct. But when the instruments told us nothing, When the radar remained blank and the light stayed, the disbelief began to twist into something colder. We had already logged the event in the flight record, tagging the time, location, and altitude, but as the minutes passed, our entries grew more uncertain. The thing wasn't on radar. It wasn't on any of our proximity sensors. And yet, it was right there, so visible it reflected off the metallic curve of the right wing. Murmansk Control. Confirm again. No traffic. No weather anomalies? Madsen asked, his voice calm but tight. The reply came back after a long delay, the radio filled with faint static. Polar 428. Negative. No contacts within 100 nautical miles. Clear airspace. Are you sure what you're seeing isn't internal lighting? I looked at John. The glow outside the cockpit wasn't faint or ambiguous. It was sharp, steady, and oddly symmetrical. He pressed the mic. Control, we've verified. Light source external, holding our altitude and bearing. Not a reflection. Of. Another silence. Then, more carefully. Copy. Polar 428. Log event as visual anomaly. Advise if contact persists. The phrase, visual anomaly, hung in the air like an accusation. It's what aviation authorities use when they can't classify something, when it doesn't fit radar data, atmospheric conditions, or human explanation. A polite way of saying we don't believe you, but we'll write it down anyway. Madsen leaned back in his seat, his jaw set. I've been flying 30 years, never seen an anomaly keep perfect formation for half an hour. Neither had I. The radar sweep on my screen moved in smooth, hypnotic circles, each pass confirming the same thing, blank airspace. The only targets were us and the nothingness. I reached over and adjusted the brightness on the weather radar, checking for any sign of electrical interference. The screen remained clean. The electromagnetic readings were normal. There were no distortions, no spikes, no interference, nothing to explain the glowing sphere still pacing us outside. At that moment, something about its behavior changed. The light shifted slightly upward, just a few hundred feet, and for the first time, it seemed to tilt. Not move exactly, but rotate, like a sphere adjusting its angle toward us. A pulse of faint luminescence rippled across its surface, as if it were reacting to the attention. Could it be a drone? I said, my voice smaller than I wanted it to be. Military, maybe? Not at this altitude, Madsen replied. No battery tech that could survive this temperature or pressure, and it's moving too smooth. No wobble. He was right. Even stabilized drones have a distinct vibration in their movement. This thing didn't. It was like it didn't need to fight the air at all, like the sky itself bent to accommodate it. For the first time in my career, I felt aware of how fragile we were inside that plane. A few inches of glass separated us from something we couldn't explain. I tried to stay focused. Should we record the feed for ATC? Madsen nodded, switching on the forward camera. Already running. The cockpit camera began its steady capture, its lens trained ahead into the darkness. The sphere lingered, bright enough now that its reflection shimmered faintly across the windshield. I could see the edges of it bend the surrounding air, just slightly, like heat haze. 10 more minutes passed. Still no radar contact. Madsen contacted ATC again, this time with an edge in his tone. Control, the object remains visual. Advise military radar. Sweep on our corridor. Possible unregistered flight or high-altitude test. The controller hesitated. Polar 428. Negative. Military confirms no scheduled activity in your sector. We looked at each other. No radar, no scheduled flights, no natural explanation. The light outside was real, and yet, officially, it didn't exist. Linda, Madsen said quietly, if we can see it but radar can't, what does that mean? I swallowed hard. It means it's not made of anything radar can detect. He nodded, eyes still fixed forward. Or it doesn't want to be detected. The words hung heavy in the cockpit. I didn't want to believe them, but they fit too neatly. After nearly 40 minutes of perfect formation, the light began to shift position again. This time, it descended slowly, drifting below our altitude before sliding out of view under the fuselage. The sensors stayed quiet. A few seconds later, it reappeared on the opposite side, smooth, silent, and impossibly fast. I stared at it, heart hammering. It just crossed under us. "That's not possible," Madsen whispered. "Not without a sonic signature." But the cabin stayed quiet, and the engines hummed their steady rhythm. Whatever that sphere was, it moved through air, like air wasn't even there. The camera caught part of the movement, just a brief shimmer, a flash of motion across the glass. When I replayed it later, it would show a distorted blur, like light bending around a curved surface. But in that moment, it was clear as day. The thing was playing with us. For another 5 minutes, it drifted alongside, then slowly faded until all that remained was the faint memory of its reflection on the windshield. "Control, object no longer visual," Madsen said finally, his voice low and unreadable. "Copy. Polar 428. Confirm stable course and continue to Helsinki." We both knew what that meant. Keep flying. Forget what you saw. As the Arctic horizon began to lighten in the distance, Madsen turned to me. "You're going to log this exactly as it happened," he said quietly. "And when they ask, don't let them call it an illusion." I nodded. But I already knew what would happen. By the time we landed, the footage would be reviewed, the report would be filed, and the official response would be the same as always. No radar confirmation. Still, that night changed how I saw the sky. I used to think radar told the truth, that if something wasn't on the screen, it wasn't real. But I learned something on that flight. Sometimes, the things you can't detect are the ones watching you the closest. The moment the object vanished beneath us, the cockpit fell into an uneasy quiet, the kind of silence that hums in your ears because you're waiting for something to happen. I stared at the radar screen, hoping, almost begging, for some kind of reading, even a flicker of interference. Nothing. Just the steady rhythm of a machine convinced the sky was empty. "Linda," Captain Madsen said finally, "let's switch to manual camera control. Aim forward." I did as he said, turning the small cockpit camera toward the starboard side, where the sphere had been moments before. The camera's night vision mode brightened the darkness into faint outlines of the wing, the window frame, and the endless void beyond. For a few minutes, there was nothing but static and the soft mechanical buzz of the autopilot system. Then, a flicker. It was faint. Just a brief shimmer across the upper corner of the windshield, gone almost before I noticed it. I rewound the feed and froze the frame. There it was again, clearer this time. A pale blue reflection on the glass, curved slightly, as if a glowing orb had hovered just beyond the field of view. "John," I said, leaning closer. "There, it's right there." He craned his neck toward the screen, squinting. "That's not from inside the cabin. The light's coming from outside. Look at the reflection angle." I adjusted the exposure. The glow strengthened slightly, resolving into something round, perfectly symmetrical. It didn't flash like an aircraft beacon or pulse like lightning. It was constant, steady, cold, deliberate. For a moment, I thought maybe we were seeing the last of it, a goodbye of sorts, but before I could say anything, the light flared. The whole cockpit bathed in a sudden blue-white glow, bright enough that I instinctively covered my eyes. It wasn't a violent burst, it felt controlled, like a flash of attention. When it faded, the sphere was there again, visible for only a few seconds, drifting level with the cockpit windows. Up close, it was almost too perfect. No structure, no seams, no halo, just a flawless, hovering sphere of light. It didn't cast a shadow, but it lit the surface of the plane in soft gradients, almost tenderly. "It's recording," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Madsen nodded, his hand steady on the yoke. "Good. Keep it rolling." The orb held position for a few seconds, motionless, like it was watching us. Then, as if triggered by some silent command, it started to move, slowly, smoothly, circling the nose of the aircraft. The camera followed as it drifted across the glass, its glow reflecting in perfect synchrony. The strangest thing wasn't its speed or silence. It was the feeling that it was curious. The light didn't behave like a machine or a random energy form. It behaved like something aware of us, something studying us from just beyond reach. Then, without warning, the glow flared again, brighter, sharper, so intense it washed out the camera's sensors for 3 full seconds. When the feed stabilized, the orb was gone, completely. All that remained was its reflection, faint and ghostly, still shimmering across the windshield for a few seconds before fading into nothing. For the first time since it appeared, the cabin felt truly dark. The normal cockpit lights looked dull and yellow against the afterimage burned into my eyes. I blinked several times, half expecting the light to return. It didn't. Madsen broke the silence. "Let's see what we got." I replayed the footage, scrubbing through the timeline. There was the faint shimmer, the reflection, the brief burst of light. But the moment the sphere came into full view, the recording glitched, just static and distortion. The captain frowned. "You've got to be kidding me." "It was recording fine the whole time," I said. "The light didn't even hit the lens directly. There's no reason for it to glitch." But there it was, a perfect blank spot right when the sphere appeared. We tried copying the data onto a secondary drive, but even that failed. The video segment corrupted. Only the few frames of its reflection remained, curved faintly across the window like an echo of what we'd seen. "That's all we've got," I said quietly. Madsen leaned back, his face unreadable. "They'll take it anyway." He was right. When we landed in Helsinki, the footage and flight log were immediately flagged for review by the airline's safety division. Within hours, 2 officials arrived, men who didn't introduce themselves, just asked for the cockpit drive and both our written reports. Their tone was calm but coldly efficient, as if they'd done this before. As they packed the evidence into a sealed case, one of them looked at me and said, "It's probably a reflection. Happens often on polar routes." I wanted to argue, but something about his expression stopped me. He wasn't dismissing me. He was repeating a line. After they left, I sat in the crew lounge replaying the few surviving seconds of footage. The reflection flickered across the glass, a blue arc, perfect and silent. It shouldn't have been possible, not without a visible source of light. But there it was, proof, or at least the ghost of it. Madsen joined me, carrying 2 coffees. "They won't release it," he said, handing me one. "They'll call it atmospheric reflection, electromagnetic interference, whatever fits the checklist." I nodded. "But we both know what we saw." He looked at me for a long moment before saying quietly, "That's what scares me." For the rest of that night, I couldn't stop thinking about that reflection, the way it lingered, like the sphere wanted to leave something behind. It wasn't random, I was sure of it. It had come close enough for us to see it, then left us with only its ghost on the glass, as if that was intentional. Even now, when I close my eyes, I can still see that faint blue shimmer curving across the windshield. The one thing our cameras couldn't explain, the one thing radar refused to acknowledge. It's strange. For years, I'd believed the cockpit was the safest, most predictable place on Earth. But that night, looking at the reflection of something that shouldn't exist, I realized the truth. We weren't flying alone. We never had been. When we landed in Helsinki, the sun had just begun to rise, thin gold streaks cutting through a pale blue sky. To anyone else, it was an ordinary winter morning. But inside that cockpit, I felt like I'd just woken from a dream I couldn't explain or escape. Captain Madsen and I taxied to the gate in silence. Neither of us said a word during the post-flight checklist. The usual chatter about wind shear, approach angles, and fuel logs didn't seem to matter. What could we possibly write that would make sense? Unidentified glowing sphere followed aircraft for 40 minutes, not visible on radar, vanished without trace. It sounded like madness even to me, and I'd lived it. We filed the report anyway. Aviation rules left us no choice. The forms were cold and clinical, a set of boxes and checklists designed to make the inexplicable seem routine. Visual anomaly. No operational impact. No injuries. No deviation from flight path. Each phrase chipped away at what really happened, turning something extraordinary into a line item. The footage from the cockpit camera was taken by an airline security representative within an hour of landing. He wore a dark suit and had the kind of expressionless face that gave nothing away. He thanked us both for our vigilance and said the data would be reviewed by upper-level authorities. When I asked if we'd receive an update, he smiled politely and said, "These things usually don't require follow-up." That was it. 40 minutes of contact with something that broke every rule of flight physics, and it vanished into a bureaucratic void. That night, in my hotel room overlooking the quiet streets of Helsinki, I replayed everything in my head. The glow, the silence, the way it seemed to move with intent. I tried to reason with myself, tell myself it could have been some atmospheric plasma or an optical illusion. But deep down, I knew. It wasn't weather, and it wasn't a trick of light. It was something that noticed us. Sleep didn't come easily. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that blue light pulsing against the darkness, hovering just outside reach. At one point, I sat up and checked my phone. A new email had arrived, no subject line, no sender name, just a blank address string. Inside, a single line of text. "You saw it too, didn't you? It always finds someone." I stared at it, my heart pounding. There was no signature, no timestamp, no traceable metadata. I tried replying, but the message bounced back instantly as undeliverable. I didn't tell Madsen about it. He'd already decided the best thing was to move on. He said if we made noise, people would start asking questions, not about the light, but about us. Pilots who report strange things don't usually get invited to command international routes for long. "Let the sky keep its secrets," he told me. Still, something about that message haunted me. It always finds someone. What did that mean? A few weeks later, while sorting post-flight logs, I stumbled across an archived incident from 1998, a flight from Anchorage to Helsinki that had reported anomalous luminous activity over the same polar corridor. 2 crew members had witnessed a glowing orb keeping pace with their aircraft for nearly an hour. The official explanation: high-altitude atmospheric reflection due to geomagnetic conditions. But the description matched ours word for word. I managed to track down one of the crew members listed on that report, a retired pilot named Captain Alan Briggs. He lived in Scotland, so I called him. He was quiet for a long time after I introduced myself and mentioned the date of his flight. Then he said, in a voice rough with age and certainty, "You don't forget the color of that light. It's not from here." I asked what he thought it was. He didn't hesitate. "Whatever it is, it watches. You don't find it, it finds you." After that call, something changed in me. I stopped looking at the sky the same way. Every time I crossed the Arctic routes, every time the cabin went dark and the world outside turned to nothing but stars, I found myself glancing toward the starboard side, waiting for that faint, impossible glow. Once, months later, I caught something faint, just a shimmer at the edge of the window. I froze. My breath caught. But when I blinked, it was gone. Maybe it was nothing. Perhaps it wasn't. Captain Madsen retired not long after that. He never spoke publicly about what we saw, and neither did I. The official report remained buried, unacknowledged, sealed under unexplained visual event. But the memory never left me. There's something deeply unsettling about flying over that stretch of sky now. It feels aware, like the silence up there isn't empty, but listening. Sometimes, when I land after a night flight, I check the windshield before shutdown. The reflections are always normal, the usual glow of runway lights and taxi beacons. But every so often, at the right angle, I think I see it again. A soft blue curve, faint but deliberate, sliding across the glass as if to remind me it's still there. And I can't shake the feeling that one day it will find me again. It's been over 2 years since that night on the polar route, but not a single flight has felt the same since. I still fly, still love the silence above the clouds, but there's always a small, persistent weight in my chest every time I cross the northern latitudes. I tried for a while to convince myself that what we saw was some rare atmospheric event, something that could be explained by science if I just looked deep enough. I spoke to meteorologists, astrophysicists, and even a former defense analyst who specialized in aerial phenomena. Every one of them gave me the same polite answer. Interesting, but inconclusive. But that's the problem. Inconclusive doesn't erase 40 minutes of contact with something that defied every known rule of flight and technology. Captain Madsen retired not long after the incident. He sent me one final message before disconnecting from all contact. It simply read, "If it ever happens again, don't follow it, just keep flying." I didn't understand what he meant until a few months later. On another night flight, crossing near the same polar corridor, the northern lights shimmered faintly ahead. The passengers were asleep. The air was smooth and still. Then, out of nowhere, the radar glitched. A single flicker, a blank patch that came and went too quickly to trace. I looked up, and there it was. Not bright this time, not bold. Just a soft, blue-white glow in the far distance, hovering silently at our altitude. It didn't follow us. It just stayed there, like it was waiting. I stared at it until my eyes blurred. When I blinked, it was gone again. Now, whenever I take off, I can't help but glance at the northern horizon. The passengers below think of flight as freedom, but up there, it feels different. The sky isn't empty. It's vast, yes, but it's also alive in ways we don't yet understand. I don't tell this story to frighten anyone. I mean it because part of me hopes someone else has seen it too, that maybe, somewhere, another crew is looking out a cockpit window right now, watching that same silent sphere drift beside them, wondering what it wants. And if they are, I hope they remember what Captain Madsen said. Don't follow it, keep flying. Because whatever that thing was, it wasn't a star, and it wasn't human. It was something that chose to reveal itself, and I can't shake the feeling it's still watching, just beyond the edge of sight, waiting for the next night when the world above the poles goes quiet again.